how to make the invisible visible, I think.
Carrie Weems is a contemporary American artist. Working in photography and video, her work confronts issues of racism, gender, politics, and identity, particularly those in African American communities. Weems is particularly interested in using the visual language of documentary photography, blending in with narrative fictional scenes to challenge her audience preconceptions and to force political and social change.
My life, I think I've really spent my life really examining ideas about power, and probably because for the most part, I didn't think I had any. And to then figure out what it means to be empowered and how to empower and how to impact through not only the work that I make, but the work that I care about.
In her work, Manet's Type, a familiar image of the famous portrait of Olympia, a painting of a pale young prostitute modeled after Titan's classic Venus, comes into the mind of the viewer. In the painting, we transition the focus from the shocking white nudity of a white woman to the black female maid standing next to her in support of the prostitute. So far, Olympia was praised for its beautiful depiction of the prostitute's naked body, as well as the confrontational gaze of the confident young prostitute.
And so I'm always questioning what has been left in and what has been left out. And what is my relationship to what has been made historically and what has been left out. And so then how to reframe, how to reposition, and how to insert for the first time a body that has not often been there, or to pull forward a body that rests in the background.
However, Carrie pauses all of us in a moment of Western art history to pay attention in the way which the maid is almost ignored and neglected from the prostitute's gaze and the rest of the audience. Similar points are made in mentioning Picasso, de Kooning, and Duchamp, since the world was captivated by discussions other than racial and gender inequality.
It's very difficult because at a certain point you realize that I'm not his subject. This historical body has not been, for the most part, the subject of these great painters. From the 19th century or the 20th century, or as we move into the 21st century, it is not a part of their imagination, it's not a part of their fantasy.
Carrie Weems' work, Not Manet's Type, is especially powerful because her work is not only limited nor only inspiring to colored audience. The narrative is unfolded in 5 photographs, one after the another, each story challenging the viewer from prior bias and expectations of what it means to be a woman, especially a woman of color.
I think one of the things that's interested me for a really long time is the way in which we might become accomplices in our own victimization. What are we responsible for? What are we responsible for in terms of what happens to us? What do we relinquish? And so this role of responsibility in all things, I think, is absolutely key. And I try to explore that a lot in the work.
What I find interesting in this work is the portrayal of nudity and how nudity is used as an important tool to depict vulnerability of the subject's character. By positioning the naked female body through various lenses, by situating the naked female body through layering, like the bed, the furniture, in a domestic setting, the viewer is left to engage with the whole photograph instead of merely enjoying the nudity of the female body, which is what we have always been trained to do so.
I have to use my skin that I've received. And now I have to use my skin and my body to push for an even wider path.
Throughout her whole career, Weems has restaged historical moments and created images that reimagined everyday life from family stories to political history. Weems focused her camera on her own body to create multiple conversations. She interrogates and assembles old stereotypes and disassembles them.
One of the things that I really came to understand about myself in some way, maybe sort of crystallized in some sort of way, is that really, I'm really a woman who is fundamentally interested in social justice. I really don't care much about a lot of other things. I'm really interested in social justice and all the permutations that exist around that thing, how to negotiate that, and from, when and where you enter that platform is one thing, but that is the core of my concern, and that is the thing that sustains me day in and day out, is I think probably one of the most important things that I've come to understand about my own practice and about my own life and the way that my practice sort of intersects with my life.
The beloved kitchen table series is a set of intimate black and white photographs that undermine tropes of African American life and womanhood as they depict the artist seated at her kitchen table alone or alongside various other characters.
And so in part, I also realized that the sort of material that I was reading, pieces like Laura Mulvey's work, as much as I appreciated it, did not necessarily have space for African American women or for brown women or for women of color. That our position, our historical position, our cultural position, our social position, and how that position had been imposed in some ways on these bodies was not really a part of her sort of critique, which was not her problem, but it was simply true.
The beloved kitchen table series is a set of intimate black and white photographs that undermine tropes of African American life and womanhood as they depict the artist seated at her kitchen table alone or alongside various other characters.
And so I made this body of work, the kitchen table series. It started in a curious way as a kind of response to my own sort of sense of what needed to happen, what needed to be, and what would not be simply a voice for African American women, but what would be a voice more generally for women. It's this sort of begging the question of how do we begin to alter the domestic space, the social living arrangement, the social contract. How does that get changed? What I'm suggesting really is that the sort of war that gets carried.
In many of her work, Carrie is always playing around with the notion of color and that nothing is ever simply either black or white.
Color is always exaggerated. And maybe that's really the point. The color is always exaggerated, that it's not really real. That race is a construction, right? That we constructed as a sort of notion of difference.
Weems' work often exhibit a complex and bold narrative around color and the way it's used to create meaning and add a personal and political layer in her works.
So using sort of these sort of ways of dealing with color, where color becomes a sort of really beautiful imagining of things, beyond simply being this real thing of what does it mean to be black in America? What does it mean to be white in America? What is this thing about privilege or disadvantage? What are the relationships between those things? But there are also these sort of there's another plane of color, where color, exists like, metaphorically. It's absolutely beautiful, right? Where the child and the subject becomes like a little gumdrop. But one of the things that I love doing, and one of the things that I cannot stop myself from doing, is considering other artists. that I can't rely on these artists as much as I love these artists, and that they've disappointed me greatly. As much as I love them, I revere them, I'm also very, very disappointed in their engagement of the historical body of self, of the black self, of the black body, of the black imagination.